Jordan Grace teams up with Masha Slamovich to take on Alicia Edwards and Tasha Steeles. Wendy Chu takes on Rosemary in a no disqualification match. We will hear from Joe Hendry, and Moose is the new TNA X Division champion. This is your TNA Impact Review. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Wrasslin for Life Network, and welcome back to another edition of the TNA Impact Review. I am your host, Ringsider Anthony, and we have a lot to talk about from this past week's episode of TNA Impact, including Moose becoming the new X Division champion by defeating Speedball Mike Bailey. But TNA kicked off with Jordan Grace and Masha Slamovich teaming up to take on Tasha Steeles and Alicia Edwards. And you know, with those four, there's a lot of history there. We've had history with Alicia Edwards and Masha Slamovich. They were the Knockouts Tag Team Champions for the majority of 2024, and that ended when Tasha Steeles was the replacement for Alicia when she got injured, and then they lost the titles. Masha and Tasha lost the titles, and then Tasha and Alicia turned on Masha. So there's history there. We also know that Masha and Jordan Grace have history. Jordan Grace was just dethroned by Masha Slamovich at Bound for Glory. Masha is the new TNA Knockouts World Champion. So there's a lot of history between these four women, and they are in a tag team match on this week's episode of TNA Impact. This match was light work for Masha and Jordan Grace. They picked up the victory. Masha choked out Alicia Edwards. She has an injured neck, or she's playing that she has an injured neck. She choked out Alicia Edwards and she tapped out, and that is our victory right there between that match. Masha Slamovich and Jordan Grace picking up the victory. I was surprised that Masha and Jordan were able to coexist. They are friends behind the scene. That is kind of known in this storyline, that Masha and Jordan are very good friends behind the scene, but they coexisted. It was a fun match. Jordan Grace and Masha Slamovich picked up the victory. And a big surprise and a big return that happened last week on TNA Impact. Savannah Evans is back in the Knockouts division. Savannah Evans is back with TNA Wrestling, and she made a statement last week. She made a statement by attacking the new signee to the Knockouts division, Lei Ying Lee. This week, she explains her attack, and she said she is basically tired of everyone coming in being the big deal. I've been here. I am the big deal. I need to be treated like the big deal. And this is what Savannah Evans needed. I like Savannah Evans. I think she's a great talent, and I think she could be a huge asset to the Knockouts division. In her previous roles in TNA, she's been that enforcer. She's been that bodyguard for Giselle Shaw, for Tasha Steeles, but she is more than that. Savannah Evans is more than just an enforcer, a bodyguard. She can hold down some matches, and I think this is the rebuilding stage for Savannah Evans. We have Jordan Grace potentially leaving soon, so you can make Savannah Evans like the powerhouse in the Knockouts division, since we won't potentially have Jordan Grace going into 2025. This is the time where we rebuild Savannah Evans, and I think we are on the right track. Having her attack some of the newcomers, having her just be the powerhouse that she is. And that was really kind of the first time I've heard Savannah Evans on the mic, and she delivered. So yeah, give Savannah Evans that rocket, and I think she could fly and fly high. Savannah Evans is back in TNA Wrestling, and I can't wait to see what they do with her in the future. We head into our second Knockouts match of the night. Wendy Chu versus Rosemary in a no disqualification match. And we know the history with Wendy Chu and Rosemary. They started teaming up just a couple of months ago. Seems like they were picking up momentum, and it seems like it was a good thing going. But all good things must come to an end. At Bound for Glory, Wendy Chu and Rosemary teamed up to take on Spitfire to challenge for the TNA Knockouts World Tag Team Championships. They came up on a losing effort. Spitfire retained the TNA Knockouts World Tag Team Championships. After that match ended, Rosemary turned on Wendy Chu. Is this where we get Havoc back? I just want to take a pause here. Where is Havoc? Do we get Havoc back? I'm ready for Havoc to return. But after the Bound for Glory match, Rosemary turned on Wendy Chu. That is what's led to this no disqualification match on this week's episode of TNA Impact between Wendy Chu and Rosemary, which was ultimately won by Rosemary. So now, where do we go from here? Is this the end of Wendy Chu and Rosemary? I believe so. I believe Wendy Chu goes back to NXT, does her thing over there, and I believe Rosemary, kind of pursues her singles career in TNA. Maybe she goes after Masha Slamovich for the TNA Knockouts championship, or Havoc returns and we get Decay. Like we get the girls back together. We get them in a tag team back together. Not sure what's going on with Havoc, but hopefully she returns soon. But that is where we are with the Rosemary Wendy Chu storyline. I feel like we have come to the end. We have come to the end of this glorious NXT TNA partnership with them two. And we're moving on. Wendy Chu heads back to NXT. Rosemary stays in TNA, and we see what happens next with Rosemary. It was a good thing while it lasted. I enjoyed the Wendy Chu and Rosemary team up. We shall see what happens next with the both of them. The feud between Steve Maclin and Josh Alexander is far from over, and Steve Maclin made that clear in the promo package we saw him in on this past week of TNA Impact. He basically called Josh Alexander a coward. He said the standard, the blueprint of TNA wrestling, Josh Alexander is a coward. And he says, you claim you have beaten me at Bound for Glory. You tied me up, had my hands tied behind my back, but you can't beat me because I am bulletproof. He said he has saw through Josh Alexander and his facade since their scheduled match at Rebellion of about a year ago, before he had to relinquish the title because of injury. He said he saw his true colors then, and he sees his true colors now. And this feud is far from over, and I'm excited for this. An angry Steve Maclin is a scary Steve Maclin, and I'm excited to see the third match between these two. We've had two matches before. We had the one at Victory Road last year in 2023, and we had the one just at Bound for Glory, both won by Josh Alexander. So at this point, Steve Maclin needs a win in this feud, and I believe that's coming. I believe that is coming. But if this is one of Josh Alexander's final feud in TNA before he seeks free agency early next year, this is perfect. This is perfect. Both of these guys have really made a name for themselves in TNA wrestling, Josh Alexander and Steve Maclin. And these two are the big top two guys, with Moose too as well. But these are the two big top two guys in TNA, and having a feud with these two, I think it's perfect. With Josh Alexander playing the heel role, which Steve Maclin has really played a lot in his career with TNA, being the heel, but Josh Alexander playing this heel role, and Steve Maclin kind of playing the tweener, the face here. And I think this is perfect as Josh Alexander potentially makes his transition out of TNA wrestling. But I'm excited for this feud. I'm excited that it's continuing. I'm excited that it is far from over, and I can't wait for Steve Maclin to pick up that win against Josh Alexander. The Rascals are in a rebound season. So we had a treehouse segment. You know how funny those segments are. But at the end of the day, they are looking to rebound. They are looking to become winners again. They need to be in that winning circle. They've been on that losing end. And ever since their weird summer with the Rascals reunion on NXT, and then the Rascals breakup on NXT with Wrasslin turning on Zachary Wentz and Trey Miguel, they're trying to rebound from that. They've gotten rid of the dead weight with Wesley. So now They got to focus on themselves, get back into that tag team division, and get back to winning titles. And I think that's coming soon for the Rascals, but I'm glad we're seeing them back on TNA TV, back together, and eventually back in that tag team division winning like they usually do. So there was a backstage altercation last week on TNA Impact with Joe Hendry and Ryan and Nick Nemeth. And basically, it came to a head. Santino told Joe Hendry that he really has to start from the bottom again to climb back to the main event scene. So, what Joe Hendry wants to do is face Ryan Nemeth one on one. On this week's episode of TNA Impact, we hear from Joe Hendry. And you know, when we hear from Joe Hendry in a Joe Hendry segment, he usually has a song behind it. And he wrote a song for Ryan Nemeth, basically saying this song is about his career, his wrestling career. And he said, I asked the network to go longer if needed, to list out all of the things in Ryan Nemeth's career. So the song starts, and it's basically Ryan Nemeth's career, and Joe Hendry sings, it's Nick Nemeth's brother, the end, meaning he hasn't really had a career. Crowd laughs, chants we believe. Next week on TNA Impact, Joe Hendry goes one-on-one with Ryan Nemeth. Looking forward to it. But that is what we have gathered from this Joe Hendry, Ryan Nemeth, Nick Nemeth story, and Joe Hendry's pursuit of the TNA World Championship. As we say goodbye to another tag team in the Knockouts division in TNA Wrestling, and that is Rosemary and Wendy Jew, we say hello to a new emerging tag team in the Knockouts division in TNA Wrestling, and that is Ash and Heather, Heather and Ash. Ash by Elegance and Heather by Elegance are a new tag team in the Knockouts division in TNA Wrestling. And last week on TNA Impact, we had Ash by Elegance take on Danny Luna in some singles action, one half of the TNA Knockouts World Tag Team Champions. And Ash picked up the victory. So on this week's episode of TNA Impact, we have Heather take on the other half of the TNA Knockouts World Tag Team Champions in Jody Threat. And although Ash picked up the victory last week, Jody Threat picked up the victory this week. So it's 1-1 basically in this feud with Spitfire and Ash and Heather by Elegance. Excited to see where this tag team goes. Excited to see how we get more tag teams in this Knockouts tag team division because we really need that. But I eventually believe Ash and Heather will pick up those tag team championships hopefully soon. I'm thinking Genesis. Genesis is in January. Genesis means beginnings, new beginnings. This could be the new beginnings of Ash and Heather winning those TNA Knockouts World Tag Team Championships. But yes, this match happened and Jody Threat won, and we will see what happens in the future. How did we get to the main event? How did we get to this main event on TNA Impact this week? Moose versus Mike Bailey for the X Division Championship. Now, let's break down what's been going on. So, on last week's episode of TNA Impact, there was a backstage confrontation between Moose and Speedball Mike Bailey. And in so many words, Moose said he can take that X Division title from Mike Bailey anywhere, anytime, any place. And as Mike Bailey is a fighting champion, he said, let's do it. So the match is set. The match is set for this week's episode of TNA Impact. Moose versus Speedball Mike Bailey for the X Division title. But let's look at the history of what's been going on with the system and Moose and Speedball Mike Bailey. So at Bound for Glory, the system lost the tag team championships. Brian Myers and Eddie Edwards lost the tag team championships in the Full Metal Mayhem match. Moose hasn't been champion since Slammiversary. He lost the TNA World Championship in that 6-way elimination match at Slammiversary. At Bound for Glory, Moose lost to Mike Santana. Mike Bailey defended and kept his TNA World Championship against Vikingo at Bound for Glory. Again, I said Moose lost to Mike Santana at Bound for Glory. So why is Moose getting a title shot here? Why is Moose going after the X Division Championship? We don't know, right? So we get to this match. High praise to this match. high praise to this match. This was phenomenal. Every time Mike Bailey is in that ring, he puts on a stellar match. Moose, top tier talent in TNA. He calls himself, the tribal chief of TNA wrestling, but top tier talent in TNA, calls himself the franchise. This match was excellent. Probably the best match I have seen in all of wrestling this week between WWE, AEW, and TNA. This was the match of the week for me. Both gentlemen put everything they had in that ring and they delivered. And then we got a new champion. Moose is the new TNA X Division champion, and he has never won that title. And he won that title this week on TNA Impact. So now Moose is the crown of the X Division. He is holding the X Division in the palm of his hand. He is about to run the X Division. And I don't know what happens next. I don't know what happens next with Moose. Who's his next challenger? Does Speedball try to challenge again? I don't know, because we still have to talk about Speedball Mike Bailey, because something happened after that match that I'm not happy about. Speedball Mountain, Trent Seven, Speedball Mike Bailey. Trent Seven came out after that match. It looks like he wanted to console Mike Bailey for, just losing his title. And what does that backstabbing person do? He backstabs Mike Bailey. He attacks Mike Bailey from behind. And that is how we end the show. Trent Seven turning on Speedball Mike Bailey, Trent Seven turning heel at the end of TNA Impact. So that pushes us to a Speedball Mike Bailey feud with Trent Seven, the end of Speedball Mountain. I'm excited to see this. I am highly upset with Trent Seven. I'm also a little upset that Moose is the new X Division champion. We couldn't give the title to anybody else. We had to give it to Moose. I don't know. Is Mike Bailey out the door with TNA Wrestling? We do know his contract. I believe his contract is up at the end of the year. So this could be the end of Mike Bailey in TNA, or he could resign and we could see him next year. But is Mike Bailey out the door in TNA? Is that why we had the title change? Why was it Moose? I need all these questions answered very, very soon. Like next week soon, like next week's TNA Impact, I'm gonna need some answers, because Moose is at the top of the X Division. Trent Seven has now turned on his former tag team partner, Mike Bailey. Everything is crazy. Everything is a mess, but Moose is the head of the X Division. He is leading the X Division now, and this is going to be interesting. That is the end of the TNA Impact review this week. That is the end of TNA Wrestling and everything that went down this past week for TNA. Jordan Grace and Masha Slamovich picked up a huge victory against Tasha Steelz and Alessia Edwards. Moose is the new X Division champion. We got some movement in the TNA World Championship picture, which Eddie Edwards is actually the next challenger for Nick Nemeth at Turning Point. We'll talk about that next week. But yeah, we got some big movements this week, progression of storylines, and it was basically a knockouts heavy night with 3 knockouts matches going down. This was a great episode of TNA Impact. Next week should be good as well. I will be back next week with another review talking about all things TNA wrestling. If you are watching on YouTube, thank you. If you are watching on any of the podcasting platforms, and I should say listening on any of the podcasting platforms, I thank you as well. This is the TNA review. I am your host, Ringsider Anthony, and I will see you in the next one.